So I'm going to tell you a little bit about big data and what we do with big data at Mendeley. Since I have very limited time, a quick skip through to make you understand how the Mendeley system actually works, because it's quite fundamental. Many people think Mendeley is actually a good reference management tool, but there's so much more behind it. So how it works, it's a tool that allows you to organize your PDF documents. So you can drag and drop the PDF documents that scientific publishers such as Elsevier publish, and Mendeley would then extract that information from those PDF documents via intelligent algorithms and create your little intelligent database of articles automatically. You can then, as a researcher, add and highlight add annotations, make highlights, also share this in groups, so actually get some collaboration going. And besides productivity and collaboration, what we then do is, as a third step, we aggregate all this information anonymously in the cloud. So everything that's going on in the individual libraries of Mendeley users eventually finds itself in Mendeley Web in an aggregated fashion. We don't disclose of course, the profiles of the individuals, but what we can then do is we can say, okay, what are the most read papers in a specific discipline? Or who is a very active researcher in biological sciences, and so forth and so forth. The way that looks like, just to visualize that, it's a productivity tool. You have all your references, the PDF documents attached. You can do a full text search across your database. If you click on a PDF document, it opens up. You can make highlights and annotations. And in shared groups, those highlights and annotations have different colors. So it's really focused on productivity and collaboration. However, if you aggregate all this productivity and collaboration activity in the cloud, what you can do is you can derive tremendous insights, and that kind of adds a complete new layer to how we look at science. So what you can see here, for example, is you can see what are the most popular groups that people engage in based on, let's say, the activity of how people interact with papers in their individual and collaborative libraries. You can see what are the most popular papers based on the number of readers. You might actually turn this around and say, I want to find out what is the least discussed paper given a specific keyword. So it's not only about popularity, but it's about surfacing the social layer that is actually going on in academia where we previously didn't have any infrastructure to support it. You can also see popular tags that people have applied, active researchers. And so what Mendeley effectively does is, besides being a good tool for productivity and collaboration, we drive a social discovery engine. That actually has turned out quite well. We get a lot of user love where people actually say words like, I love Mendeley. It brings the fun back to science. Or, I love you, Mendeley. So I think the important thing here to understand is, and that is also, I feel, something that we should look at in education, why can't we make research, which for me, as a former PhD student, was really tedious, really annoying. You had all this, administrative stuff, sifting through papers. Then you had a paper at home. You couldn't synchronize it. You couldn't take it with you. Now you can synchronize it with Mendeley. Why can't we make this whole experience fun? And why can't we make the whole school and education experience fun in the same way Mendeley has made science fun to people? Because these are testimonies. I come back to that in a second. The big data aspect about Mendeley is that the crowdsourcing aspect, which we also discussed earlier here, the crowdsourcing aspect of Mendeley, tapping into the individual computers, into the individual knowledge bases of people, has allowed us to amass data tracking around 550 million documents, scientific articles, research artifacts. And it's really interesting to see what's going on there. What we have is we have the information about the documents, of course. We have also information about user profiles, demographics. We have the user-generated tags, nodes. We've developed a recommendation engine based on usage behavior. And we have real-time reading and usage stats, which are a fantastic complement to citations, because citations take 2-3 years until they emerge and somebody gets credit for their work in the field of research. Now we can look at, well, somebody has published a paper and we don't need to wait for citations to emerge. We could theoretically look at Mendeley usage stats and say, well, this has really had an impact in a specific community. And I'm not talking about necessarily a huge amount of users, but I'm just saying we can now track what's going on, how people are interacting with your document without actually relying on the citation. Now, this is, of course, so much data that it's very hard for a small company like Mendeley, as we previously were, now we are part of Elsevier, to make sense of out of that data. So what we did is, startup solution, we said, okay, we gave access to that data to the academic community. So we've developed an open API which lets other people access that data and try to figure out where they see the value. And that has led to about 300 third-party applications who now connect that Mendeley data, which is the statistics and the data I showed you, back to other things. So there might be real-time altmetrics, the whole altmetrics movement, where you now have actually scorecards, other companies that use Mendeley data and rely to a large extent on Mendeley data. You have tools like KindSync, which synchronize your Mendeley library with your Kindle, something we wouldn't build because we have limited resources, but other people can build. Or tools like OpenSMP, where people now can connect their analysis from DNA, let's say, analysis providers such as 23andMe to actual research papers and see whether there are research papers that tell you that your DNA analysis points to maybe some weakness in your DNA and tells you that you might be more risky at getting Alzheimer's later. So how do we use big data in product development? I strongly believe that if you use data, big data, you can generate a better UX. You can achieve a better UX, which means people use your product more often. You achieve a personalization. In our example is, for example, a personalized recommender, which works on real time. So you can select a few documents in your library and say, give me additional reading recommendations based on that selection. It's a fantastic feature, and we can see this working in music and in photo sharing and all the other industries, but we couldn't see this really in academia. Together with an aspect of social, like you have your network in Mendeley, it actually compels users to interact with your product. And that means, of course, then, the more people partake in your product, you achieve network effects, and eventually you will have so many users that you can convert some of them to become subscribing users. And so in effect, what I believe is that a company's strategy has to be using data to attract and retain users. So 3 specific examples. I mentioned earlier, we use data on the back end to personalize the front end. Personalize the front end is a personalized recommendation engine. So we cross-compare an individual's library across 3 million other researchers and say, well, based on reading behavior of other people, you should be reading those papers. Second example is we use big data on the back end to make data available on the front end. So what that means is we data mine research documents and try to extract from those documents, for example, the table of contents, graphs, and other tables, for example. And the third example I want to give here is we also use big data directly on the front end. As I said earlier, we have these third-party application ecosystem. There's one aspect I want to come back to, which is the social aspect of what we do and why it's so important to think about that, not only in academia, but also in education and in basically any other industry. So we know already that we have a lot of data in any industry you want to look at. In our case, we have a lot of data and content that is being produced by publishers. On top of that, you have a sliver of, let's say, metadata, and that is automatic semantic enrichment, where you have, let's say, machine learning algorithms that try to extract information from a paper, connects it to another paper, but it's all automated. There's very little, let's say, interaction with humans. But there's one layer on top of that, which I believe is the social layer, which we are missing out. And in other industries, actually, companies have done a tremendously good job in capturing that. And so the question is, if that is today, what if then tomorrow the social layer actually becomes the driving force of how people interact with content, how people interact with data, how people interact with everything that's out there. Conclusions, right on time. So conclusion, in my view, personally, I think personalization can overcome privacy. So we had the discussion about, well, how do we deal with privacy? But I do think that big data offers the opportunity for excellent products with excellent UX. I think it's also important to keep in mind that the value of big data is not always visible beforehand. So, if we give it out to people to figure out where the value is, then we'll figure it out. But if we prevent access to big data, for example, by having too restrictive or being too concerned about privacy, then we might restrict value creation in the first place. And my vote would there be, entrepreneurs usually are pretty good at starting small, trying to attack and tackle one specific problem and grow from there. And everything that's uninteresting will fade out anyway. A question, of course, is then what happens about the ownership of data. So we license our data under CC BY, but we need to make sure that